Hi everyone, meet me again, Ilham. In this video, I will tell you about a very interesting film. This film is titled Speak, which was released in 2004. Okay, let's go straight to the storyline. The film opens by showing a teenage girl named Melinda, where at that time her mother was surprised to see Melinda, who made her lips look like they were being sewn. From here, we also know that throughout the film, Melinda will not speak. Then she prepared to go through her first day in grade 9 or 3. In this new school year, Melinda was the first person to be picked up by the school bus. Not long after, she was approached by a transfer student named Heater. Far different from Melinda, Heater was very happy to chat. Upon arriving at school, Melinda was continuously watched like an enemy, where because of this treatment, Melinda was late to class. She was reprimanded by a teacher named Mr. Neck. Then Melinda came to her first class this year. It happened that the class was a biology class, and she would be in a group with a student named Dev. Then time passed, and this time she was in English class. Well, in this class, Melinda had a former friend named Rachel, which 1 year ago Rachel was very close to Melinda, until one day they held a big party at Rachel's house. However, suddenly Melinda called 911, which ended up with some friends being caught because of drugs. And since then, Melinda was immediately hated by Rachel. Not only Rachel, Melinda was also hated by the whole school. She was also teased with a pig sound, which innocently Eater cheered without knowing what it meant. Without saying a word, Melinda had to start the next class again. Here she got an art class and was taught by a teacher named Mr. Freeman. Mr. Freeman was so enthusiastic about art that he deliberately made a hole in the globe to place some paper. The paper must be taken by each student, where later there is one object that must be developed by one student. And after Melinda's turn, Melinda felt burdened with the object she got, because it turned out Melinda got a tree object which she was not good at drawing trees. Because she was not good at it, the tree that Melinda drew was really simple, like an elementary school child. After that, Melinda was also mocked by her school friends. Rachel looked incredibly happy and even belittled the drawing made by Melinda. Yes, at this stage, no one knew why Melinda kept her mouth shut. Even her parents, she could only stay silent for no reason. When the day changed, Heater spoke again at length. Meanwhile, Melinda never responded, which she just kept quiet while being in a daze. Even when following the cool X, Melinda never said a word. Then they came to Mr. Neck's class. Mr. Neck teaches in a history class where he is very strict in teaching sessions. In this topic, he discussed immigration. And who would have thought Mr. Neck was so racist that he even mentioned immigrants who had made his child unemployed? As a result, a debate session was immediately opened for anyone who had an opinion. First, he pointed to Hitler, and Hitler said that only Native Americans should be allowed to work in this country. But after a black student spoke, Mr. Nex closed the debate session. Dev immediately felt that this was not a matter of immigrants or not. According to Dev, Mr. Neck's son was lazy and unfit to work. And for that answer, Dev was immediately told to sit down or he would be thrown out. However, Dev preferred to leave the class. After class, Melinda continued to be called by Mr. Neck, not knowing what he would be told to do, but what was clear was that Melinda deliberately hid in a warehouse. And in the warehouse, Melinda realized that this room was not used at all. After school, Melinda kept thinking about not saying a word at all. She wondered if anyone would ask why she always kept her mouth shut. But in fact, until now, everyone has not felt curious at all. Which ended up, Melinda routinely spent time in the school warehouse without ever interacting with anyone. As time goes by, Heater seems to have new friends. Well, at this point, a student named Andy appears who is Rachel's lover. As a new kid, Melinda's existence is never considered at all. So to enjoy lunch, Melinda can only come to the art room, where happily Mr. Freeman allows Melinda to eat in that room. But besides eating, Melinda is also told to draw anything. If you think about it, Mr. Freeman really cares about every student. But unfortunately, the school never cares about art lessons. Mr. Freeman also said that the budget for art classes had been cut by 50%, which means that this lesson will be increasingly isolated from other lessons. And as time goes by, Melinda also spends time alone. Without speaking at all, Melinda is still disturbed by people around her. While at home, both of her parents are really busy with their respective jobs. Her mother is an accountant while her father is a lawyer. Besides that, both of her parents are also aware that since she became hostile with Rahel, Melinda has never spoken at all. The next day, Melinda began to be given several pieces of bone by Mr. Freeman. She was asked to focus on imagining the object she got at the beginning of the meeting, namely a tree. And here Melinda began to rely on several available items, until finally her work began to be praised by Rachel's colleague named Evie and also Mr. Freeman. After art class, Melinda was invited by Hitler to support her friends. At this point, Melinda could only accept it without being able to refuse at all. In fact, while sitting in the audience seat, Melinda was routinely teased by several students. She was teased for calling the police at Rachel's party. At the same time, Rachel was getting closer to Andy, who also had a hobby of teasing Melinda. In a short time, exam week had arrived, and every subject had to be faced by the students, which the longer it took, the less Melinda focused on studying, in contrast to Rachel, who was so active in class. And when art class started again, Melinda accidentally injured her hand. Clearly, the lack of focus began to haunt Melinda's mind. What's more, when she was going to dissect a frog in biology class, Melinda had to faint instantly. Long story short, Christmas had arrived, and this time Melinda received a gift from her parents. She was also given drawing equipment, which Melinda suddenly didn't know what she was going to do with the drawing equipment. Then when she returned to school, Melinda immediately received bad news from the heater. Heater said that he could no longer be Melinda's partner because, according to Hitler, Melinda was a depressed person who should need medical help. Yes, after being left so easily, Melinda also received a reprimand from both of her parents. She was told that her final grade in Mr. Next class got a D. From there, Melinda immediately rushed to ask for additional assignments as a form of improving her grades, which Melinda was told to write a 50-page essay about a historical event. As a result, Melinda chose the theme of the struggle of women who were once treated like dogs. And after her essay was summarized, Melinda was told by Mr. Neck to read the results of her essay in front of the class the next morning. With this order, Melinda, who had never opened her mouth, began to get confused. She immediately asked Deb for help to speak the next morning. As a result, Deb accepted the invitation and immediately helped Melinda. It's just that Mr. Neck did not agree with this method. As a result, Melinda's grades were not improved, and she had to be called by the school's top brass. Both of her parents were present at this meeting, where Melinda was asked to be more active and open her mouth like other students. It was strange why Melinda continued to behave like this, even though last year she was still acting normally like a teenager in general. Besides that, Rahel was increasingly busy with her own world, while Melinda could only reflect while spending time alone. And occasionally, she also hid in the wardrobe without knowing the reason. Until one time, Melanie decided to skip school. She used all the time that morning to be able to tell anyone. Incidentally, Melinda chose to tell a nurse, but she didn't talk to the woman right away. Melinda deliberately followed her to the hospital and realized that there were many patients lying in every room. Based on what she saw, Melinda deliberately used one of the empty rooms to disguise herself as a patient. It's just that her efforts did not bear fruit because not a single nurse asked about her whereabouts. The next day, Heater suddenly came to Melinda's house. Heater said that she needed Melinda's help to accompany her shopping, because it turns out that Heater has been made into a slave by her new friend. For an instant, Melinda vehemently rejected the invitation. For the first time, Melinda took a firm stance and immediately expelled Hitler. Hearing that Melinda was starting to be brave, her mother immediately smiled proudly and secretly. And since morning, Melinda was much more active than before. People were confused as to why she could be this agile. It didn't end there. Melinda also approached Rachel alone. Luckily, Rachel was in a good mood, and she immediately served Melinda, where Melinda immediately borrowed a piece of paper. And it turned out that Melinda wanted to tell her that she had been raped. Instantly, Rachel was shocked to death. With that confession, the story turned to the party a year ago. There was a reason why Melinda called 911. Not because she was a nerd or whatever, but it turned out that without anyone knowing, Andy had raped her by force, and Melinda was threatened that if she complained, Andy would kill her parents. Suddenly, Melinda still dared to call 911, but she didn't dare to say the reason at all. And when the police arrived, several children who were enjoying drugs were immediately arrested. That's why, until now, the report was considered by the school to be a nerd report. Initially, Rahel did not believe Melinda's words at all, until one day, Rachel immediately interrogated Andy for his actions that night. However, Andy ran away while swearing at Rachel. From there, Rachel finally began to believe Melinda's words. Then, since that confession, Melinda began to be more active in class. Unusually, Melinda dared to speak loudly. Even for the first time in the past year, Melinda returned to pouring her attention to her father. She invited her father to plant plants together behind the house, which clearly had not been done again in the past year. It's just that bad news had to come from Mr. Freeman. Mr. Freeman decided to leave the school to find a new job as a musician. And before the two of them really parted ways, Melinda immediately invited Mr. Freeman to go to the school warehouse, which unexpectedly, in this room, Melinda's work related to trees was really visible. This ability was immediately clearly visible after Melinda told Rahel the truth. And after acknowledging Melinda's work, Mr. Freeman immediately shed tears while being moved. Shortly in the same room, Melinda began to be approached by Andy. Andy again threatened Melinda and attacked her like the incident that night. But this time, Melinda managed to pour chemical liquid into Andy's eyes and ended up with Andy being temporarily blind. At that moment, some of the students began to realize what Andy had done. News of his actions that night had spread widely, and the man was immediately beaten together with Mr. Nex also realized the incident. Now Melinda felt much more relieved. She was able to open her mouth as usual without feeling threatened at all, where in the end her mother was also told the real story, and Melinda's parents would process Andy through legal channels. At the end of the film, Andy had been successfully thrown in prison, while Melinda began a new relationship with Dev. Yes, in essence, this film teaches us to dare to open our mouths when something has happened. Don't let your case be like Melinda's. It's getting worse before you dare to open your mouths. Yes, who knows, among you who watch this video, there are still those who don't dare to speak up. And hopefully after you realize it, you can dare to speak up about all the treatment that men do to women or vice versa. The film is finished. See you in the next video.